Roll the window down. Now. The man barked into the darkness, headlights glaring directly into her eyes. She didn't know it yet, but 3 minutes later, she'd be lying in a pool of blood. And the cop who pulled the trigger would be sentenced to life in prison. Because the woman he just shot was a federal prosecutor. It was a quiet September night in Rockridge, but for Danielle Morgan, it would become a living nightmare, authored by a racist cop. She wasn't just a black woman, she was a federal prosecutor driving home from work. Her Lexus ES 350 glided through the empty streets, the soft hum of jazz playing from the speakers. But minutes later, flashing headlights loomed behind her, followed by the shriek of a siren. Danielle pulled over, just like she'd seen happen in countless legal cases. But what she didn't expect. The officer approaching her car wasn't looking for the truth. He was carrying bias. And a loaded weapon. She wore a sleek black suit, her hair neatly pinned at the nape of her neck, hands resting calmly on the steering wheel. The jazz continued to play softly as her mind went over tomorrow's trial, a case that would challenge the boundaries of justice itself. Then suddenly, red and blue lights flashed. The sharp wail of a siren split the night like a blade. Danielle frowned and slowly pulled to the side. She shut off the engine, rolled down her window, and placed both hands on the wheel, just like she'd heard from dozens of victims she'd once represented. A harsh voice barked, "Roll the window down. Now." A large man approached. The headlights behind him cast his face in shadow. All she could see were cold, piercing eyes and a clenched, square jaw. "What violation am I being stopped for, officer?" Danielle asked, voice steady, polite. "Out of the car, hands on your head, now." No patience, no explanation. She swallowed hard. "I believe I have the right to know the reason for this stop." He stepped closer without a word. Across the street, a young officer, Luis Navarro, stood at a distance, watching silently. Concern flickered in his eyes. Danielle exited the vehicle slowly. She didn't want this to escalate, but her heart was pounding inside her chest. "Name?" the officer asked, hand hovering near the Glock on his hip. "Danielle Morgan. License and registration." She handed over the documents, that never taking her eyes off him. He glanced at her papers, then at the car, then at her expensive clothes. A crooked smile appeared on his face. "Out this late, fancy car alone? That's suspicious." Danielle said nothing. She had seen that look before, a blend of suspicion, prejudice, and quiet hostility, all dressed up as routine procedure. "Your right taillight's weak. That's a ticket. Unless..." He paused, eyes narrowing. "You'd rather make a donation. Officer Support Fund. Say, $500. Nice and quick." Danielle froze. "I'm sorry, I don't give money without a receipt or a lawful reason." His smile vanished. "Step out of the vehicle. We need to run a further inspection." She knew this was dangerous, but as a federal prosecutor, she also knew her rights. Danielle opened the door, stood up straight, and locked eyes with him, calm and firm. He circled to the other side. Navarro didn't move, just stood watching. Then Danielle saw him lean into the passenger seat, rummaging through the console. She narrowed her eyes, just in time to see it, a small object shoved quickly between the seat and the gearshift. A plastic bag of white powder. He turned around, lifting the bag like a prize. Well, Miss Morgan, big night plans? What's this, huh?" Danielle's eyes widened in fury. "You just planted that. I saw you. Shut up," he snapped. "Trying to call your crew? Trying to film me?" Danielle reached into her inner blazer pocket. "I'm calling my attorney. She's armed," he shouted, and drew his weapon. Bang! The shot rang out, echoing down the street. Danielle collapsed. It felt like fire tearing through her lower abdomen. Blood soaked her crisp white blouse. She fought to stay conscious, but the world blurred. Navarro stood frozen, his eyes wide, his entire body trembling. He had seen it all, and he knew. The woman who'd just been shot was unarmed. Whitaker crouched down, frantically searching Danielle's purse, desperate to justify what he'd done. When he opened her wallet, his hands froze. A hard black badge, silver-embossed seal catching the light. United States Department of Justice, Danielle Morgan, Assistant U.S. Attorney. His face went pale. His lips began to tremble. His fingers on the gun started to twitch. Oh, God. Luis Navarro didn't sleep that entire night. From the moment the gun in Whitaker's hand thundered, the bullet ripping through the darkness and into that woman's body, something inside him shattered. He had never thought he would witness, with his own eyes, what people often called the American nightmare. He, a young officer, a first-generation Latino in the Rockridge PD, had once dreamed of a police force that was clean, just, and honorable. And now it was his own eyes that saw a fellow officer plant evidence, pull the trigger, and spin a blatant lie before the blood on an innocent woman's shirt had even dried. Danielle Morgan. He had heard that name more than once. She had spoken during orientation at the Rockridge Academy, the kind of speaker new cadets were told to look up to when it came to courage and integrity. And tonight, she was lying still, blood soaking her clothes, the victim of a dirty power game. Navarro sat alone in the duty room. The clock read 3:12 a.m. The preliminary report he had started writing was now crumpled into a ball on the desk. The silence in the room couldn't drown out the roar inside his chest. What am I going to do? Whitaker, of course, had already filed his report. Everything, according to him, had gone by the book. Suspect behaved aggressively, appeared to reach for a weapon. Officer was forced to discharge his firearm. Lies. Every word was a lie. Navarro stepped out, walking slowly to the parking lot. The night still hadn't lifted, and Rockridge City was buried in a darkness that went beyond the absence of light. A darkness born of injustice. At Rockridge General Hospital, Danielle lay in the ICU. The wound had been treated urgently, but her condition remained critical. She was placed under special monitoring, not just because she was a federal prosecutor, but because someone out there was afraid of her surviving. An FBI agent named Marcus DeLeon had been dispatched from the regional bureau. He stood guard outside the ICU door, staring through the bulletproof glass. That woman wasn't just fighting a physical injury. She was fighting an entire system. A system that wanted to bury the truth she stood for. 9 a.m. Navarro stood in front of the locker room mirror. His eyes were red and swollen after a sleepless night. He wore the uniform, but for the first time in his life, it felt like it didn't belong to him anymore. He took out his phone and opened the voice recording app. His hand trembled slightly, but his voice was firm. September 13th, 9:03 a.m. I'm Luis Navarro, officer with the Rockridge PD. This is an off-the-record statement. I confirm. He paused, inhaled deeply. I confirm that last night, I witnessed Officer Ray Whitaker intentionally stage a false crime scene, plant narcotics, and shoot an unarmed woman. The victim is Assistant U.S. Attorney Danielle Morgan. Navarro hit save. He knew, from this moment on, his life would never be the same. But he also knew that silence would be just another gunshot. This time, aimed at the truth. Danielle woke up for the first time early Tuesday morning, 3 days after the shooting. The harsh white light from the hospital ceiling blurred her vision, but the sound of the monitor beeping and her own breathing gradually pulled her back to reality. Pain, cold, hazy, but still alive. Outside, Agent Marcus DeLeon immediately notified the FBI investigative team. Danielle's awakening wasn't just a medical milestone. It was the spark that ignited a legal and political storm. At the Rockridge FBI headquarters, Luis Navarro's recording had reached the special agent in charge. An emergency meeting was called. Navarro was summoned, no longer just a city police officer, but now a key witness in a federal investigation into the crimes of a municipal cop. Meanwhile, at the hospital, something serious occurred. 2:47 a.m. The security cameras in the ICU hallway flickered, then went black. For exactly 3 minutes, a man in a white lab coat and a surgical mask pushed a medication cart down the corridor. The night nurse had stepped out to the supply station. The man opened Danielle's door. She was still asleep, her lips pale and dry. He pulled a syringe from his pocket, filled with a clear, colorless liquid. He approached the bed, checked her IV line, and began inserting the needle into the connector. The door burst open. Marcus DeLeon and 2 hospital security officers stormed in. Freeze! Hands off! The man turned, trying to flee, but was tackled to the floor. The syringe slipped from his hand, spinning across the sterile white tile beneath the hospital lights. Danielle stirred awake, her eyes catching the image of a panicked face being slammed to the ground and the blade-like stare of a federal agent above him. The would-be assassin was arrested. No identification, no words, no resistance. The incident was kept quiet, reported directly to Washington. A special unit was deployed to protect Danielle. The FBI confirmed This was a targeted assassination attempt, not the work of a lone actor. Which meant one thing: someone inside the system wanted her silenced. 72 hours later, Danielle was fully conscious. She agreed to give a statement. Her complexion was still pale, but her eyes no longer trembled. She recounted every detail from that fateful night. Whitaker's voice, the way he searched the car, the small bag of white powder, and the moment she reached for her phone. "I just wanted to make a call." But he screamed, "She's armed," and pulled the trigger immediately. An FBI agent asked, "Do you believe he knew you were a prosecutor?" Danielle looked straight ahead. "Not at first. But after he shot me, he searched my purse, and when he read my badge, he trembled. I saw it in his eyes, fear, not of me, but of the system he had just crossed." The investigation shifted course. This was no longer a case of one rogue cop abusing power. It was a conspiracy. Organized, directed. Luis Navarro was placed in a temporary witness protection program. The FBI confirmed his testimony aligned completely with the camera footage, blood pattern analysis, and firearm examination. As for Danielle, when asked, "Do you want to back down?" she gave a faint smile. "No. Because if I stay silent now, then the badge in my wallet might as well be a scrap of paper." Federal Court, South Rockridge District. First day of trial. The media had pitched tents outside the courthouse before dawn. Microphones, cameras, and signs reading "Justice for Danielle" were everywhere. The entire nation was watching, not just to see a police officer on trial, but to witness a reckoning with a system that had enabled abuse, covered its tracks, and nearly killed justice itself. Danielle Morgan walked into the courtroom, her steps still slow, but her eyes steady. A tailored gray suit framed her slender figure, the result of weeks in a hospital bed. Behind her walked an FBI agent, the lead federal prosecutor, and her closest friend, who also served as a representative of the Civil Justice Alliance. Across the room, Ray Whitaker sat hunched, hollow-eyed, visibly grayer than before. Once a decorated officer who thought himself untouchable, he now faced 5 federal charges: intentional infliction of serious bodily harm, abuse of power, fabrication of evidence, obstruction of a federal investigation, and willful violation of civil rights under Title 18, Section 242 of the U.S. Code. The entire courtroom went still as Danielle was called to the witness stand. Her voice was low, slow, but firm. She recounted everything: the blinding headlights, the shouting, the planted bag of white powder, the gunshot, the blood soaking her blouse, and that chilling moment when her justice badge was flipped over like a wound in the heart of the system she once believed in. "The man who shot me wasn't just a cop. He was the embodiment of corruption, of fear that true justice might actually prevail." The defense tried to pivot the narrative, that Whitaker had acted in the dark, relying on instinct, believing the suspect might be armed. They brought up past dangerous situations police had encountered, a thin veil of justification. But every argument only made the evidence more damning. Luis Navarro took the stand. His eyes met Danielle's before he swore in. "I couldn't live with myself if I stayed silent," he said. "I saw him plant that bag in the seat. I saw him pull his gun. I saw her reach only for her phone." Though Bodycam footage was incomplete, it captured Whitaker's shouting, his false claim, "She's armed," and Danielle's agonizing scream after the shot was fired. Forensic experts confirmed no fingerprints from Danielle were on the drug bag. The bullet was fired at close range, no sign of struggle. The trial lasted 8 days. The prosecutor ended closing arguments with these words: "Justice is not armor that anyone can wear and be assumed right. Justice is accountability, and today we are here to reclaim that accountability." The jury deliberated for 4 hours. When the forepersons stood and read aloud, "We find the defendant, Ray Whitaker, guilty on all counts." A collective exhale filled the room. Danielle reached for her friend's hand. She closed her eyes, not out of pain, but because justice, though delayed, had finally arrived. 2 months after the verdict, Danielle Morgan did not return to the prosecutor's office. She declined every major interview request, all the talk shows, the national headlines. Instead, she showed up, quietly, unexpectedly, at a small auditorium at the Rockridge Community College, where she used to volunteer teach courses on law and civil rights. Before hundreds of students, she stepped onto the simple wooden podium. No stage lights, no security barricades. She wore nothing but a plain white shirt and dark slacks. "I'm not here to talk about pain," she said. "I'm here to talk about how a system can change. If you dare to stand up," she told her story. Not with bitterness in her voice, but with something glowing behind her eyes. The light of someone who had been through hell and still came back with her faith intact. The students sat in silence. Some cried, others took notes nonstop. At the end of her speech, she held up her old prosecutor badge, its edges frayed, one corner cracked. "This used to be a symbol of power. But after everything, I've come to understand, justice isn't in the badge, it's in the choice you make, to stay silent or to speak when you see something wrong." Danielle went on to establish the Freedom Justice Fund, a nonprofit dedicated to helping victims of systemic abuse. In its first year, the fund provided legal support to over 200 cases across the United States. Luis Navarro transitioned into a role as a special advisor to the Department of Justice. In a rare interview, he said, "I used to think neutrality was how you survive. But that day I learned something else. When you stay neutral in the face of injustice, you stand with the oppressor." 3 weeks after her speech at the college, Danielle received a strange envelope, no postmark, no return address. Inside was a faded police report, a photo of a black woman, a bag of white powder on the hood of a car, a vague written statement. Scrawled in messy handwriting across the top corner, "Case looks like yours, but she didn't survive." The woman in the photo was named Marcia Rhodes, arrested for alleged possession of narcotics after a routine traffic stop. She died in custody 3 days later. The report said, "Sudden respiratory failure." Danielle placed the papers on the table. Her eyes darkened. She knew Whitaker wasn't a lone wolf, and this wasn't about one case. It was about a system with fractures deep in its foundation. Together with Luis Navarro, now DOJ advisor, Danielle began reviewing every suspicious arrest in Rockridge over the past 10 years. The names started to surface. Patterns emerged. Late-night stops. Victims, mostly people of color, usually women, often alone, always the same white powder, never witnesses, always ending in silence. Their suspicions were confirmed when a former officer, anonymous, contacted the Freedom Justice Fund. He had once served in a covert unit called Echo 9, trained to soft-handle potential disruptors. In reality, they were a legal trap unit, operating primarily in city border zones. Danielle submitted a full report to the Department of Justice, but this time there were no applause like in the Whitaker trial. She was summoned to a closed-door congressional hearing. Some lawmakers even questioned whether she was manufacturing narratives for political gain. Rumors spread. The Freedom Justice Fund was accused of exploiting victim stories to manipulate public sentiment. An internal investigation was launched. A bill was introduced to restrict federal funding for independent legal nonprofits. In a tense strategy meeting, Luis looked at Danielle and said, "They're testing your endurance." Danielle didn't look away from the presentation screen. She just said, "Then let's show them the one thing they can't kill, is the truth." In November, Danielle formally testified before the Federal Judiciary Committee. She brought only 3 things: a copy of the Marcia Rhodes case file, a visual report of incidents linked to Echo 9, her old justice badge, now framed in glass. She spoke before Congress. "I once believed this system just needed minor repairs. Now I know, some parts need to be dismantled from the root if we're ever going to call this justice. It's not about me, but the thousands like me who were, are, and will be set up, unless you, in this room, choose to stand in the light." 1 week later, under public pressure and irrefutable evidence, the Danielle Morgan Justice Reform Act passed the Rockridge State House. It included mandatory multi-angle bodycam coverage for all arrests after 10 p.m., federal registration required for any special operations unit, an early warning tracking system for repeat entrapment patterns by specific officers. Danielle declined to hold a celebration. Instead, she sent a voice message to friends and colleagues. "I didn't win. I just stayed alive long enough to make them look in the mirror." A year later, at a TEDx talk, Danielle ended her speech with a single line that brought the entire room to its feet. "Don't wait for justice to knock on your door. Be the one who knocks first." If you're watching or listening to this story, remember, this story was never about me. It's about all of us. Share this. Subscribe to Radio Life Stories. To amplify truths that must be heard, to shine light on people who must be seen, and to stand for what must be defended. Because justice doesn't show up on its own. Justice begins when you refuse to stay silent.